Hello and welcome back to the FEZ show. I hope you all had a lovely weekend. Now, today, we will sort of be an esports special as we look to dissect everything from the first test race we had on the weekend. Just a polite reminder, if you are enjoying the content, please remember to hit that like and subscribe button. Joining me on today's show from the FEZ crew are William Dodds and Jack Pickering. Morning, boys.
How's it going?
Morning.
Morning. It's been good. Obviously, a busy weekend, an actually weekend where there's actually Formula E racing. Obviously in an E-race format, but that is what we're here to literally dissect and bring down. So, what I want to talk about first, boys, is the format. Obviously, the elimination process. I want to get your thoughts on that. Jack, I'll start with you. How did you find it?
Well, when they announced it last week, I thought, okay, this is going to be a slightly better version of the F1 qualifying system that they tried for a couple of races in 2016, where they just knocked people out midway through qualifying. But I think it worked better. Yeah, I think it worked a lot better in this format than that. I like the idea. However, I think that it was. I think they started getting rid of drivers too early, and also the fact that it was only a 15-minute race. I know that they have to keep to a schedule because they also had the races all-star esports event, and they also had the Veloce esports, not the Chinese Grand Prix or whatever it was this weekend. So yeah, I do understand why they didn't have.
Yeah, that's why I want to jump in. That's why I want to jump in actually, because obviously it was a 15 lap race, and you know, I suppose it was difficult for Formula E. Obviously, they got to fill it in with all these other schedules, and it was actually, I felt personally it was all right because it was an hour and a half. You had the sim races first, which was actually quite a good race, and then you had the main event with the Formula E drivers. Again, a 15 lap race. You saw both qualifying sessions, both races, hour and a half, bish bash bosh. We've done our first test race. It was pretty quick. It was pretty frantic, Will. So I think on that regard, it went it was on schedule, which I suppose for a test race is you want it to make sure that it does actually run to schedule.
Yeah, obviously that worked out. It wasn't too long, which is obviously a good thing. I can understand how people would maybe, who are new to it, might not be engaged for kind of a full 45-minute race. So I can see why they've shortened it. Personally, I think that I'm not sure how well the elimination worked. Someone being knocked out after one lap. I'm not sure why they decided to go with that system, just in general. So yeah, maybe it could work, but I think you maybe need a bit of more of a bedding in period, especially when you saw how kind of tight that was going into the first or second corner. With just like about a 6-car pile up. I don't think 15 minutes is necessarily wrong, but I think what the Formula One esports event have done is they made the race slightly longer, and I think that's kind of, in a way, it's just allowed for a bit more better better racing rather than just kind of like a mass pile up. But maybe they could not show the qualifying, or kind of like shorten that production, or maybe even do like an edited version of the qualifying just to make it work quicker. If they just wanted to put in slightly longer race. I don't think we need 45 minutes, but maybe slightly more than 15 laps.
I think the only problem I had with the elimination process is that it was very hard. As you said, they were knocking out drivers from the first lap. And I was like, man, they were doing hours of testing. Like, Nico Muller put up like 70 laps. They were all testing in the practice session while the simulation race was going on. And like, Nico Muller put up 70 laps. Da Costa was in the 50s, Gunther was like in the 60s. Like, they'd put up a load of laps in like this test session before. And then you get to the race, and in the first lap, you're out. Which I thought, man, you've done all that prep, and then in the first lap you're out of the race. But I also felt as the race went on, when we got to 15th, 16th, like the 4th, 5th, 6th person who was like eliminated from the race, it was sort of quite hard to keep up with who was actually out, and it wasn't really always picked up on who was gone and who had actually left the race, Jack. So I think that could be something that could be improved.
Yeah, definitely. I think there were moments in that race where we just didn't see, or we just didn't know at all who was going out. There was a big incident with James Collado and Martin Croix. Just before one of them was going to be eliminated, Martin Croix was eventually eliminated. However, it was because James Collado cut the chicane. So and then James was given a penalty later on. I think he was knocked out on the next lap, anyways.
Yeah.
But still, they do need to iron out these problems for next weekend. I think maybe an idea of doing instead of a because I think the race lasted for about just over about 15-20 minutes because I know it's 15 laps. I reckon if they went for about a 25-30 minute race, it's still relatively short. And then, as Will said, maybe just not show qualifying or just like cut the sim races broadcast a bit. I think that they do need to. They do need to look back at this first race, work out what went wrong, and then just try and fix this for the next race. Because it was at times it was like, oh, what's just happened there, and what's just happened there, and yeah.
Yeah, because it was really quick. For me, maybe if you keep the sim race at that 15 minutes points, and maybe you go into the show, you have that 5-minute build up, and you maybe show a couple of like clips from, because they'll be very quick. They'll be working with Little Dot Studios, and they'll be very quick at getting those clips out. They were yesterday when they emailed us all out the clips from the race. Like, it happened pretty much instantaneously after the race had finished. So, I think there is scope to sort of like start the qualifying for the sim race at like 3:15, then get some sort of clips that they can show, and then start the race at like 3:40, for example, the sim race one. Go it, and then you've done your 15-minute race, and then you look forward to the main event, and you do qualifying, and then you've got a longer race. That could be something. The only thing I want to ask Will very quickly before we move on to the next topic of this esports special is the elimination process, obviously, do we need it? That's my question, basically. Would it have just been better that everyone actually just finished the race and there was a battle everywhere on the grid rather than just eliminating everyone each lap?
I don't think it needs it. It's not something we've seen in Formula E. It's not something we see that often in motorsport. I guess I can see they kind of want something of a kind of like jeopardy to add excitement, but I don't think it really added much. I think it was confusing, and I think it limits the number of battles you can have on track. So yeah, I would probably just scrap it, to be honest, especially in a 15-lap race. If the concern is that, if someone's way worse than everyone else and they're just going to be running around at the back for ages, then I guess maybe you think, oh, if we just eliminate them, they'd have to do that. But it's 15 laps. I don't think there's any problem. I would just scrap it, to be honest. I think there were too many things that went wrong with it to kind of persist with it, because I don't think it adds any value necessarily.
And I suppose the next thing that we're going to talk about is the driver standards, basically, because there was a ton of crashes, especially in that first corner. And if you're going to eliminate a driver on the first lap, and if they've been completely shunted through no fault of their own and fall to the back, you're eliminated on the first lap and you're going to get extremely frustrated. That's, most gamers would be extremely frustrated if you were completely shunted out of the first corner and then eliminated on the first lap after having a decent qualifying session. So I think that's quite harsh. But they're talking about, obviously, it was a reduced damage, so they were running at 25% damage. And they're talking now of putting up to 100% damage. Now, Jack, I think that's a really silly idea. Now, the contrast is that they put it on to 100% damage, that, they should drive better because they know if they touch someone, their car is going to get damaged. But it's a sim racing event. These tracks are extremely tight, especially Monaco. That's why we saw that first lap one shunt, everyone flying everywhere, basically, because it's so narrow, that strip down towards the Nouvelle chicane hairpin as we were using. But if you've got it on 100% damage, you could have wiped out 6 cars, and then you've got an elimination process, but you're not using it.
Yeah, no. Had they had it on 100%, there would have been no need for the elimination format whatsoever. But yeah, I think sending up to 100%, it's not the correct thing to do right now. However, yes, they do need to up it. I think maybe up to like 50, 60. I'm not sure if it has to be like a certain percentage, but if they up it to like maybe 50, 60, and then by around 375%, and so then So then it means that they are being a lot more careful, because it means that they can still pick up damage, but it also does mean that we're not going to have that we're not only going to have 10 cars by lap 1, eliminating the idea of the elimination format. So yeah.
Yeah, I suppose, yeah, because if you got imagine just having all those crashes at the beginning, and the thing is, Formula E tracks are tight, and even in a sim world, they're tight. Like, I've driven some of them, anyone can go and drive them. We're racing in Hong Kong next week, so you've got that hairpin at turn 1. Obviously, it's a short run, but there's a chance there. Then you've got turn 3, again, a really tight 90-degree right-hander, and that's going to be extremely tight, and there's going to be the potential to wipe Will half the grid out by the time we get to turn 3.
Yeah, I think Jack's right in saying that, maybe up the damage a bit, but I think 100% would be a little bit of a risk. But I definitely think something needs to be done about driving standards, just because it kind of ruins the spectacle a little bit. I mean, Jean-Eric Verne in particular was being incredibly rude, especially coming around the Nouvelle Chicane hairpin a couple of times, which was great to some extent. But then you look at like the kind of first lap crashes, and it looks silly. Cars kind of climbing on top of each other and then just keep going. So I'd like to see a bit more damage, just to make the drivers think about their driving a bit more, just be a bit more careful, and just mean it's not just silly in the way they're going about, and it's not a proper race. And going back to the elimination point, I was talking about this with a friend, saying that, to get that kind of large number of people on the grid, there must be some kind of, I'm not sure how the contracts work, but there must be some kind of, the teams pressurising the drivers at least to be involved. And I do think that, if you're making drivers take quite a lot of time out of their schedule to play and to be involved in the event, I think that, just then seeing them eliminated after 50 seconds of racing is kind of a bit, perhaps a little bit annoying for them. They've taken quite a lot of time out, and then they get to do one lap and then they're out.
Yeah, I suppose things like sponsors will probably be unhappy that, the cars... Obviously, the sponsors are on the car, but you're still representing those brands even though you're racing for that team. So they might not be happy that, their driver's technically been eliminated after one lap, which is a bit of annoying. And also, I suppose with Formula E tracks, and it's the same in normal Formula E racing, it's extremely hard to overtake. And we were racing in Monaco, where in every Formula E race we've had so far, there has been hardly any overtaking. So for drivers in an elimination process, they are going to have to sort of bump and barge and try and, move their way through the field that way, rather than actually, a clean overtake as such. So upping the damage is going to completely prevent any sort of racing, Jack.
That is a possibility. However, that's why we've said kind of don't go all the way with the damage. Just leave it like 50-60. Maybe do another privatized test session with. I think initially they were only planning 14 drivers to take part on Saturday, and then 21 turned up, and then they decided because 21's turned up, we'll add Jan Mardenborough, Nick Cassidy, and Sam de Jong. I think maybe do another test run behind like closed doors, so like no one sees it, and see how that goes if they up the damage, and then hopefully everything runs smoothly by Hong Kong this weekend.
I suppose, like what Formula 1 drivers have been doing, you've seen like the likes of Lando Norris, Charles Leclerc, Will, they've all been racing the F1 2019 game, and maybe the FE drivers like Van Dorn, people who are on the sims quite regularly, they could go test it out, maybe test it at 100% damage, and then report back to Formula E just to say, look, it wouldn't really work, it wouldn't make it fun, you're going to lose a lot of drivers, and maybe express their concerns, and maybe Formula E then won't say, let's not race at 100% damage just yet.
Yeah, there's definitely a balance to be had. You're right in saying, we don't want it to the point where the drivers are just kind of going in a long line because they're too scared that if they try and move for an overtake, they're just going to damage their car. But at the same time, you don't want them climbing on top of each other and just kind of like knocking each other out of the way in order to gain positions. I think you can have a similar debate with the track limits and the Formula One esports event, where they're all just taking liberties. I think it was at turn 10 and then on the final turn as well, and it just looks silly. They're deliberately going beyond the track limits in order to gain speed, but it's not how you're supposed to race that track, and it's not proper driving. So I think there is a balance to be had, because we want to see a pretty realistic kind of simulation of what happens on a real racetrack. And I think that if you're allowed to just barge up the inside of someone and know that you're not going to lose your front wing or damage your bodywork or get a flat tire, then that's not a realistic simulation. Obviously, it is a slightly different discipline, but I think that those kind of basic rules of motorsport should still apply.
So what I want to move on to, because actually you mentioned simulation there, and obviously with these 15-lap events, it isn't actually really simulating a Formula E race in terms of the energy management. We're not seeing that. They're all running at 250 kilowatts. They're not running at the 200. They could literally run max speed for that whole 15-lap race. And there was a lot of people on Twitter, and a lot of people who messaged us and said, there was no energy management. You're not seeing the drivers try and conserve energy, and it wasn't really like a Formula E race. But, Jack, the only way you can have an energy management race in a Formula E car on R Factor 2 is if you run a 45-minute race. So the argument is, if you run a 45-minute race, then you might have to scrap the sim race, or you might have to scrap some of the things that they want to do. And also, it's keeping people's attention on the social media platforms, on Twitch, YouTube. They can switch to anyone at any point that they want. And if the race is long, and if it becomes a bit stale and a bit boring, and especially if it's on 100% damage and half the field's already out of the race and we still got 25 minutes to go, there could be some real problems that way. So what do you think about Formula E maybe doing an energy management race, or a 15-minute sort of sprint race, which they're doing?
I think the best option is to go straight down the middle. Don't do either. Do 25-30 minutes. It should be good. Because then it gives enough time before the elimination format kicks in to have maybe like 5-10 laps of some close racing, and then have the final 15-20 minutes or so of the elimination format that they so desperately want. And it still won't bring in that amount of energy management, but I think, well, I'm not sure how it works on R Factor 2, but the thing is, I think the Formula E cars, they go for 46-47 minutes when they add in that lap, and a lot of that is saving. So overall, if you ran a Formula E car flat out, I'd expect it to go for about 35 minutes or so. So I'm not sure if there will be that much energy saving at all, but I reckon that they do need to up the amount of laps, I'd say.
Yeah, I suppose it's difficult, because obviously people want a Formula E race as such, and it's difficult when you're trying to obviously fit in all these schedules and everything else that goes about it, Will. So, what's your thoughts? Do you think we should go down an energy management route, or is the 15-lap race something that we should continue with, or should we up the race a little bit? So maybe 20 laps, try and fit a 20-lap race in, but then you start the elimination process like 5 laps in.
I'd personally be up for just a 45-minute race, attack mode, energy management. Just do it like they do in real Formula E. I think that system has been shown to work and create a lot of good racing. I think in that case, as you say, probably we can't have 100% damage, but I think that would work quite well. I think that with the added strategy of energy management and attack mode, you could get some really interesting racing, rather than just all the cars going flat out on a circuit where it's difficult to overtake for 15 laps. So I think that would actually work better. I'm not married to the idea of the elimination, but I think if you did a 45-minute race, you could have a bit of elimination if you wanted to, kind of later in the race to try and mix things up. But I think that would work well. I don't think it would necessarily be too long, and I don't know why they need, if they don't want to, they don't need necessarily to have a kind of sim race at the start. They don't need to show qualifying. They don't need to show qualifying in full. I think that you can easily manage the time. They had like quite a lot of preamble as well, which is them chatting, which I don't think you necessarily need either. You can get straight into it. So, yeah, I think a 45-minute race could be made to work if that's what they want, and I think that probably would be best, just in terms of the added strategy and everything that I just mentioned.
Yeah, I find that interesting as well in terms of the preamble, actually, because obviously it's happened in a lot of sim races in terms of, even the F1, there's like a bit of talking before it gets going, and and when you're watching the drivers' twitches and so forth, they're just sitting around waiting, like, when are we going? When are we going? Are we going now? Oh, no, we're not going now. And, they're waiting around, and you might as well just go, just introduce the event and actually then just go straight into the race, because that's what everyone's waiting to do. They don't want to just sit around in their sim waiting, to someone to say, okay, we're going now. They just want to get on with it. So that's interesting. But what I want to sort of talk about now is the Van Dorn and Gunther. Boy, did they smash it. They completely smashed it. They walked it out of the park. They were 12 seconds clear, Jack, of Andre Lotterer. So they were the class of the field. So is these next 8 races just a championship battle now between Maximilian Gunther and Stoffel Van Dorn?
Well, yeah, I definitely think that the other 22 drivers need to pick up their game for Hong Kong this weekend. However, I'm not sure how much sim racing Max Gunther's done over the last few weeks, but I know that Stoffel Van Dorn has basically accepted every single invitation of every race so far. I think he's competed in all the not the Grand Prix by Veloce Esport. I think he's done a couple of the race
The F1
esports
races,
events. And he's also done the F1 virtual Grand Prix. I think he's done all of them as well. So yeah, he is. I'm not sure how much time he's been off the sim in the last 3 weeks, but he definitely seems to be. I think going into the race, I think going into the race this weekend, he was the favourite out of all the Formula E drivers. There are a couple other Formula E drivers who have done some sim racing here and there. You've Antonio Felix da Costa's done some.
The Costa, Jack, was he was probably my big surprise, because he has been on iRacing a lot in terms of, with the likes of Lando Norris and all the F1 drivers, Stoffel Van Dorn as well, even Eduardo Mortara, he's been on the iRacing sim. So I was expecting more from Antonio, but if you watch Antonio's Twitch, he's actually just punted in the turn 3 lap 1. He's punted into the barrier. So then the commentary, obviously they missed that, so they were a bit surprised why Da Costa was off the pace. But when you're punted, there's not much you can do, and he's fighting back, and obviously he's getting annoyed because he knows he's being eliminated. So he doesn't begin to care because he knows he's out basically from the first lap, which is obviously goes back to the driving standards bit. But I still think Da Costa can show something. I was really surprised by some of them. Andre Lotterer took to it like, I bet you any money Andre Lotterer, that was probably the first time he turned on the sim, knowing Andre Lotterer, and he just went in and just completely beasted it. And I reckon over time he might get better. I think Robin Friends is very similar. I think he might only got the sim very recently. Same with like Alexander Sims and Oliver Rowland. They didn't have sims 2 weeks ago. They've now got the sims, and Oliver Rowland didn't do quite badly either, Will. So, it might be a Van Dorn Gunther to start with, but maybe as they become a bit more acclimatized over the race weeks, hopefully, fingers crossed, that some of the other drivers actually start pushing Van Dorn and Gunther a little bit more.
Yeah, I think you'll see that. I know that Da Costa has been doing some R Factor 2 racing on the race events, so I would be very surprised if he was not someone who's up at the front. I know that, as you mentioned, Nico Muller's been putting a lot of time, and he was good. And also you just got the fact you've got people like Andre Lotterer, Jean-Eric Verne, who literally just received their sim rigs. I think they got posted to them by Formula E. So you imagine that they'll all probably be spending a lot of time on there because, what else is there to do? And I think just by all of them doing more time in the sim, then I think they'll all just get better. Just through practice and through familiarising themselves with the game that they're going to be using as well. Because you've got to remember that some of them might be used to playing on on iRacing, as you mentioned, or on the F1 game, or on Gran Turismo or whatever. maybe not having necessarily got much experience of R Factor 2. So there's going to be a learning process and a process of them just kind of familiarising themselves to the simulator they're actually using. But I think once that's all happened, I think you'll probably get higher racing standards and also just a more even field. I think you've seen in the F1 esports events, it's still not perfect, but the quality of the race was much better yesterday than it was in the first two. And it was just much more interesting and just better to watch because they were, all better at the game. There weren't people just miles off the back so much. They're all kind of generally within 2 seconds of each other in qualifying. I think that's just a teething process that Formula E has to go through.
Yeah, you're definitely right.
One thing that I want to say about the F1 virtual race is that they have no regard for track limits whatsoever over there. I'm very happy that Formula E can have these walls in place to ensure no track extending.
Although hilariously, I did see on the when they were showing the replays, and obviously they're hitting the wall, but it looked like they were glitching through the barrier on the Formula E race, which I thought was quite funny at some point. But what I wanted to bring up just to sort of end the show is obviously R Factor 2. They've only got 2 official Formula E tracks, and we've used one already in Monaco, and we've got Hong Kong, which is going to be what we're racing in next week. And that's the track that we're going to. So what do you expect Formula E to do now? There is talk, obviously we've fueled the talk of this DLC packet that Formula E probably, the way that they're talking at the moment, they sound like they want to race on official Formula E tracks. They don't really want to race anywhere else. But if an official DLC, if we're just talking rubbish and that's actually not coming, then they can't just race on Hong Kong and Monaco every week. So they're going to have to actually pick some tracks, Jack, to race on. So what sort of tracks do you reckon that they might pick to race on in R Factor 2, possibly?
Firstly, please Formula E give us a DLC for R Factor 2. I will buy R Factor 2 as soon as they announce a Formula E DLC. That would be so cool. That would be so
I
cool.
think that's what the fans want, though, really, is an actual... They've been crying for an official sort of Formula E game, and R Factor 2 is probably the closest thing that there is to a game, but there's only got those 2 official tracks. Yes, there are modded tracks, so it sort of makes it an official game, but it technically isn't, because all those tracks are made by somebody else. But if Formula E were to actually create that DLC, then Formula E can say, look, our game is on R Factor 2, buy R Factor 2, and you would race in Formula E.
I think that this is something that the fans have wanted to. I think I remember reading as far back as Punta del Este season 2 or something. This is how long that we've wanted a Formula E game, and so I think it would be so much fun to have Formula E tracks and Formula, because I hope that they don't just do ones that are on this year's calendar. I hope that but I know it's unlikely, but I'd love to race around Putrajaya and Punta del Este, and I know that we're going to speak about our favourite track at some point in the future. But yeah, there are quite a few tracks that that I would absolutely adore to race around. And so yeah, but if they weren't to do that, obviously Donington is the main one that comes to mind if they're not going to do any official tracks. Maybe also Valencia. I'm not really sure. Apart from that, they might go to a few other street circuits that they have done in other series, so like the Norris Ring. They might even do Valencia, the old Valencia F1 circuit. I don't know, but yeah, I think it'll be good regardless.
Yeah, but the only other thing, Will, that I think might be quite interesting is if Formula E actually then take themselves, if they weren't to do a DLC packet, if they actually then take themselves to a different environment and say, this is what would happen if we were to race at Silverstone on like the national layout, or for example, go to Donington and race on that layout, or go to Pembroke. I got a few tweets telling me that Pembroke is a really good R Factor simulation race on R Factor 2, and that might be a really good place for Formula E to go. So it might be quite fun for Formula E to go to these different tracks.
Yeah, so a couple of the tracks I've seen people play on R Factor 2. I haven't used it myself, but I've seen. I know that the race did the Nürburgring, and I know they also used the Indy road course. I think it would be quite fun to experiment if we don't have any actual Formula E tracks, as you mentioned. Potentially like a shortened Silverstone circuit, like the national circuit would be quite fun. You could even go as far as like racing on ovals. Just literally, do what we want. If you're not using the real track, you could just experiment, and we could see a Formula E on a full race, a full range of different circuits, and really try and mix it up. And if you're worried about it kind of getting a bit stale, then why not go from racing at somewhere like the Norris Ring to racing a kind of like I don't know if they have the Nordschleife version of the Nürburgring, but why not do that? It'd be fun just to mix it up and see how it goes.
And I suppose that would broaden Formula E's appeal, because if you are racing, it brings that excitement level up. You're like, oh, we're not just seeing them race round Punta del Este or Rome or Paris, for example. We're going to somewhere that's actually a bit more, not saying Paris and Rome are not exciting, they are exciting, but you're going out of your comfort zone, a bit like what V8 supercars have done by racing at Spa, Monza. Even IndyCar have gone to Spa and Suzuka to race in. No, they're not official IndyCar events, those ones, but a different sort of IndyCar series, esports series, where all the official drivers are still racing in, have gone to Spa, they've gone to Suzuka. So, it'd be fun to maybe put Formula E Jack in an environment where it's not normally in.
Yeah, totally. I'd love to see them on permanent circuits. There are obviously a few permanent circuits that are in city centres. Obviously, we go to Mexico City, not on the same layout as the Formula One race, but also Shanghai is in the middle of the Shanghai circuit's in the middle of Shanghai, and there is a layout where you can cut off that big long kilometre straight that the Formula One cars use, that the Formula E cars definitely shouldn't use, because it's a kilometre long. There are quite a few other tracks that I would like to see them go to, but yeah, I think Formula E on permanent circuits, let's see how it goes. But yeah, obviously the whole idea of like staying in city centres for real life Formula E is obviously where we want to go.
Definitely, and I think we could probably talk this esport event for ages now, but I think we've got to end because we're running out of time. So I think, in short, we still want to see how this elimination process works. Whether or not they will change the format between now and Saturday is questionable. I don't think they will, but unless they really think that they could do something better, and depends on what feedback they get and how many messages they got and what feedback they have internally, maybe something will change. But I definitely think that eliminating someone after one lap is a bit too early. Give it like a 5-lap grace period, and then maybe extend the race to 20 laps, or have it like a 20-minute race, and then after the first 5 minutes, you start getting rid of drivers. But boys, I want to say a massive thank you to coming on the show.
Thanks, Chad.
Thank you.
And please remember, if you're really enjoying the content, to please hit that like and subscribe button. You've been watching the FEZ show. We will see you tomorrow. Goodbye.